There is this experience, and I think it's almost universal, but it feels profoundly isolating. You're sitting there, you've carved out the perfect hour for that one important task, everything's ready, the goal is clear, but your body is just heavy. Your mind is thick, you're frozen, the inertia, it's so intense, it almost feels physical, you know? Like trying to push a car uphill in quicksand. And that's when the voice arrives, that inner critic we all know so well. And it isn't gentle, it's sharp, it's judgmental, and it whispers that old, terrible lie, you're just lazy. And we immediately buy it. We mistake that feeling for some kind of moral failure, don't we? A character flaw to be conquered.
And that is the precise moment where we need to just press pause. We have to completely shift the frame. Our mission today for this deep dive is to stop treating that painful inertia, that frozen feeling, like a character flaw that we have to discipline into submission. We're going to challenge that really deeply ingrained Western myth that says your output is your world. And that rest, or especially stillness, is basically a sign of failure.
It's amazing how deep that message goes. When the energy dips, our first instinct isn't to ask, hey, what's my system trying to tell me? No, we immediately jump to, the self-flagellation. Why can't I be stronger? Why can't I just push through this? So, okay, if we take away the judgment, if we throw out the word lazy, what is this? What is this profound heaviness that just freezes us in our tracks?
It's a state that is so much more complex and ultimately, I think, more compassionate than that simple, harsh label allows. If you look to some of the ancient wisdom traditions, like Buddhist psychology, they describe a state that captures this feeling perfectly. It's called thinamita.
Thinamita.
Yeah. And it's often poorly translated in English as sloth and torpor, which, again, carries that same moralistic stain we're trying to wash away. A much more accurate, and I'd say more humane way to think of it, is mental heaviness. That's the thina. And energetic depletion, which is the mita.
Wow. That distinction alone feels kind of revolutionary. So the mind's dullness, the fog, that's thina. And the body's sinking energy, that plea to just stop, that's mita. But I have to ask, for the listener who is just steeped in that shame right now, how do we tell the difference? How do we distinguish this heavy, frozen state from just, being plain old physically tired? What makes this a signal and not just a sign I need an early night?
That is the essential question, isn't it? If it were just clean physical tiredness, a solid 8 hours of sleep would, reliably fix it. But this depletion, this thinamita, is so often caused not by idleness, but by, by accumulated overwork, by constant stimulation, and critically, by unprocessed emotion.
Unprocessed emotion.
Think about the constant performance we demand from ourselves. We ignore the body's whispers for days, maybe weeks, maybe years. We're just constantly driven by some external idea of success. And we try to force action from a soul that's already running on fumes, a soul that's exhausted from all that emotional labor. We don't get productivity. We just get this deep, painful internal friction. And that friction, that's the heaviness you're describing.
So the resistance we feel, it isn't resistance to the task itself. It's resistance to the state of depletion we're trying to drag into the task.
Exactly. Let's use an analogy. Imagine a traveler lost in the desert. They've walked for hours under a blazing sun. Their resources are gone. They're spent. Then they stumble upon a tiny oasis, a pool of water, a bit of shade. They sit down, and they don't move for hours. Are they lazy?
Of course not.
Absolutely not. Their stillness isn't surrender, it's survival. In that moment, it is the highest form of wisdom.
And yet we're that traveler, but instead of honoring our oasis, we grab this whip of self-criticism. We berate ourselves for not just marching onward. We demand that we be stronger, and we label that necessary pause a failure. Why are we so terrified of that pause?
Because the ego is terrified of vulnerability. And the stillness in that pause reveals our vulnerability. The ego, it prefers the illusion of control, the idea that if I just try harder, I'll be okay. It prefers that over the humility of actually listening. The ego loves binary thinking. You're either productive or lazy, strong or weak. But awareness lives in the nuance. It asks a much better question. What kind of tired is this?
That really is the starting point, because there's the tiredness after a good workout, that clean tiredness, which feels good, restorative, but then there's that other exhaustion, the one that feels dense, immovable, the one that comes from, from emotional labor, from constantly bracing yourself or suppressing grief.
And that's the awareness we need to cultivate. So here's a simple but revolutionary practice for you listening right now. The next time you feel that heavy drag, that resistance, just stop. Pause before you judge. Do not let that inner critic take the microphone. Instead, maybe place a hand on your heart or your solar plexus and just ask, What is this really? And just breathe into that space. Ask yourself to notice the texture of the fatigue. Is it dense and heavy like wet clay? Is it hollow like an echo? Is it sharp with resentment? Or just dull with resignation? Can you give it a color, a shape?
So we're shifting from an interpretation to a direct experience. We're no longer saying, I am lazy, which is a rigid judgment. We're saying, I am experiencing a hollow feeling in my chest, which is just an observable fact.
Precisely. And in that simple act of gentle witnessing, you separate the experience from the interpretation. You stop calling it laziness, and you start naming what it might actually be: overwhelming sadness, or violated boundaries, soul hunger, just overwhelm. That moment of naming, that is where the healing starts.
Okay, let's go a little deeper then. Let's talk about the lingering fatigue, the kind that even a vacation doesn't seem to fix. This feels like the modern tragedy, doesn't it? We've sort of collectively forgotten how to be tired without immediately feeling guilty about it.
Absolutely. We need to recognize that fatigue speaks in layers, and if we treat a deep problem with a shallow solution, we're just going to stay exhausted. We can talk about three primary layers. The first is physical fatigue. It's the simplest. It asks for simple rest, sleep, nutrition, that kind of thing. It gets replenished.
Okay.
The second layer is emotional fatigue. This is the exhaustion from holding space for others, swallowing your own disappointment, managing social anxiety, putting on a brave face all day. That doesn't just vanish with sleep, because it's the body's stored residue of unexpressed feeling. It asks for empathy, for release, to be witnessed either by someone safe or just by yourself.
And then there's that third layer, the one that really feels like the engine has just seized up completely.
Yes, that is existential fatigue. This is the soul's quiet ache. It's the deep weariness that comes from living out of alignment with yourself. It's the exhaustion of chasing goals that don't really resonate with your inner truth, or wearing masks that just don't fit anymore.
No.
This kind of fatigue is spiritual. And, importantly, it is healed by truth, not by naps.
Wait, hold on. I want to linger on that for a second because that's a heavy statement. Healed by truth, not naps. If we accept this is real, how do we avoid, using it as a kind of spiritual bypass, where we just rationalize our avoidance of hard but necessary work like, the boring admin tasks, and just call it misalignment?
That's a crucial point. And it's the difference between self-awareness and self-deception. Existential fatigue isn't about avoiding filing your taxes. It's about that pervasive low hum of dissatisfaction that's there even when everything on paper looks good. So when we talk about healing by truth, we mean confronting the reality of your current choices.
I see.
Does the truth mean you have to leave your career? I mean, maybe. But usually it's a much subtler internal shift. It might mean setting a boundary, or grieving a lost dream, or just admitting to yourself, I'm doing this purely for external validation and it is costing you my life force. The healing truth is often the painful realization that you've been living someone else's script.
And this is where the ego gets really cunning, doesn't it? It disguises this terror of misalignment as laziness. Because if I'm just lazy, well, I can fix that with a new productivity system. But if I'm fundamentally misaligned, that might require blowing up my identity, my career, my whole life. And that is terrifying.
Absolutely. The ego would rather cling to the painful known, I am a successful but lazy person, than face the terrifying unknown. It avoids the ultimate question. What if I've been living someone else's life and now I have to dismantle everything?
You see this play out all the time. I'm thinking of Maya, right? The brilliant entrepreneur who looks successful, posts about balance, but wakes up with a knot of dread in her stomach every single morning. She scrolls endlessly on her phone, not because she's bored, but because scrolling is anesthesia. It's a way to dampen the sound of her own soul screaming.
That's it, exactly. Maya's fatigue isn't a failure of discipline. It is her soul's rebellion. It's grief for the self she had to abandon in order to achieve. This dissonance, this friction, in Buddhist thought they call it dukkha, that low hum of dissatisfaction under a polished surface.
Right.
And the ego clings to the achiever identity and just labels the pain laziness to avoid confronting that underlying dukkha.
So if the solution isn't more self-discipline, it has to be mindfulness, but not the floaty, airy-fairy version. It sounds more like active, intense listening.
It is active listening, but without an agenda, without judgment. It's turning toward your inner experience and just saying, tell me what you need. I'm here to witness you, not to fix you.
Yeah.
So here's a practical application. The next time that heavy resistance strikes, pause.
Yeah.
Close your eyes and ask these three simple but profound questions. First, where do I feel this in my body? A pressure in your chest, tension in your throat, hollowness in your gut. Get really specific. Second, what emotion lives beneath the fatigue? Is it fear of failure? Is it resentment, loneliness, unrecognized grief. Give it a name, even if it feels complicated. And finally, third, what is this really asking for? Is the true demand rest, a fierce boundary, the courage to speak a truth you've been holding back, or just permission to start performing for a while?
Wow. If the core question shifts from how do I stop being lazy to am I acting from authenticity or from obligation,
Yeah.
that has massive implications for our careers, our relationships, our whole identity. I mean, are we prepared for that level of disruption?
It demands courage, absolutely. But that disruptive moment is also the point of maximum energy. See, action that comes from the ego, I have to prove my worth, I must keep up, that drains us to zero. But action from alignment, this truly matters to me. This serves my deepest truth. That energizes us even when the task itself is hard. The exhaustion doesn't come from the difficulty, it comes from the friction between who you are and who you are pretending to be while you're doing it.
So the real goal isn't doing more or trying harder. It's undoing the compulsive need to perform, dismantling the belief that our value depends on our output.
That is the path, and the paradox here, the ultimate revelation, is that the very place we thought was empty, the resistance, the inertia, is actually full of meaning. It's full of information. The obstacle really is the path to awareness. And here's the deeper mechanism at play. The ego doesn't truly fear laziness. What it fears is stillness. Because stillness is where the masks fall off. It's where the noise of obligation finally stops. And in that silence, the performance ends. And that terrifying, holy question emerges. Who am I when I'm not performing, improving myself? That's why we run to distraction, why we fill every single moment. We're running from the self we might find in the quiet.
And this isn't new knowledge, is it? Historically, intentional withdrawal from activity, what you've called viveka, that was seen as a sacred act of discernment, not avoidance. True insight, whether it's the Buddha under the Bodhi tree or an artist staring at a blank canvas, it always seems to come when we finally stop.
We forget the rhythm of nature. Nothing in nature blooms without a pause. Fields have to lie fallow. Trees shed their leaves and endure winter. But we expect ourselves to operate like machines with this endless year-round productivity. Your deep fatigue is not a failure. It may simply be your necessary winter. And the ego's panic, that feeling of you're falling behind, that's just the noise of a world that has forgotten its own cyclical wisdom.
So the choices.
The final life-altering reframe is this. We must learn to choose wise stillness over chronic avoidance. Wise stillness is love in action. It's the courage to honor your limits as sacred boundaries. Chronic avoidance, on the other hand, is just fear in disguise, distracting ourselves with shallow activity.
That feels like the ultimate shift. Moving away from measuring our existence by quantifiable output and moving toward living for inner resonance, finding that balance.
You can go back to the metaphor of a musical instrument. If you tighten a string too much striving, too much force, it will snap. And if the string is too loose, it won't make any sound at all. The middle path is finding that responsive balance, where our actions come from inner truth and necessity, not from outer pressure and performance anxiety.
So we bring this conversation full circle. The next time that heavy pull towards stillness arises, that frozen feeling, the invitation is to not shame it. Don't resist it, just sit with it, breathe into it, name the texture of it, and ask what deeper truth it's trying to show you.
And as you move through your week, remember these core takeaways. True rest is not something you earn with exhaustion. It's inherent to your humanity. Stillness is not wasted time. It is the fertile soil where insight takes root. And finally, awakening is not about becoming some brand new, more productive person. It's about returning to who you've always been before the world told you that you needed to be otherwise.
A powerful thought.
And we'll leave you with this to mull over as you carry this into your day. What if your greatest contribution to the world doesn't come from what you do, but from the courage to stop and finally listen to what your life is asking of you? What if your stillness isn't the end of your story, but the very first, most essential word of it?
Just notice the small acts today. The next moment you choose tenderness and curiosity over immediate judgment. That is where liberation truly begins. We hope this deep dive into the courage of stillness has offered you some peace and maybe some profound clarity.